this webinar, so you're considering a career as an interim executive. What we're going to run through today, a little bit about the IIM, the Institute, what brings you here, secrets of career happiness, what is an interim executive, etc. You could probably read this quicker than I can say it. And for whatever reason you've been brought here today, thank you for joining. Some of you may have been thinking about this for a while. It might have been thrust upon you through redundancy or layoff or COVID, or you just want to change. But whatever the reason, and these are many and various, the question is, am I ready? Will anyone want me? Will I be any good at it? Can I afford it? Do I have what it takes? And we're going to have a quick canter through some of these things today. The panelists you have are Tony, Simon, and Claire, who hopefully you can all see. I'm hosting. My name is Bruce Rayner, R-A-Y-N-E-R. I've been doing the interim thing, I think, before it was even a thing. Started in about 1993, something like that. So I'm probably in my 28th year. I was unfeasibly young when I started interim. I think I was about 14. Claire's bio is there. Simon, who you'll hear from, is there. Claire is a leading practitioner with one of the leading ISPs, interim service providers. That's New Street Consulting Group, formerly Interim Partners. Simon is currently with Morphosis, and he'll explain a little bit about himself. And Tony is the exec chair, has been of the IIM, has been an interim for 25 years himself at CEO level. So I suppose in choosing a career or any career, if you can find the sweet spot between what you love doing, what you're good at, and what the world will pay you for, that's really nirvana. If you can be in the middle of that sweet spot, and that's probably why a number of us have chosen to work independently, with all the slings and arrows that comes with that. But it's important, I think, before making that transition, or one of the things that we realize in making the transition is that you really have to figure out what it is you're good at to be able to sell those services, and what the world will pay you for, and what you love, and be able to convey that across a CV, across LinkedIn, and in meetings with prospective clients. I shan't read this out, but suffice to say, what is an interim executive? Well, this is, typically someone working at C-suite or just below, a highly skilled professional who really is able to bring an intervention to clients of some shape or form, but different roles, different levels of expertise, technical, both I guess hard skills and soft skills, but able to make a difference, and typically working on assignments that have a beginning, a middle, and importantly an end. The first thing interims generally do when they go into a role is figure out when and how they're going to leave. So in that regard, probably quite different from the corporate world, and again, probably devoid of a lot of the politics, or a different sort of politics than what is normally associated with the corporate environment. Why do companies use them? Well, you're experienced, you can hit the ground running, you can deliver quickly, you advise, implement, you execute. Knowledge transfer, you can generally leave the thing in a better shape than you found it, and with a team or people or intellectual capital behind you that wasn't there before, and you're immediately available and flexible. And again, the right-hand side, I won't read this out, but, you know, sudden gaps, that can be, you know, people exiting the premises for a variety of reasons, or just, you know, companies that need to change, can't figure out how to do it. Again, could be an opportunity, could be a problem. The last one here could be crisis management. So it's really figuring stuff out that the incumbent team can't.
Bruce,
yep.
Do you mind if I throw in a stat that might be helpful for people?
Please.
On the previous slide. So I think certainly in my experience of working in interim management, the majority of reasons why clients use us is because they're about to launch into some form of change or transformation. And I think I'd be confident to say about 80% of the assignments that I work on in my sector are change and transformation related. So it's a large amount of what we do. And that 20% is how you refer to it as a sudden gap fill. So somebody's exited, they need a new CFO or a new HRD or something like that. So I just thought that was interesting to share because it is heavily focused on change and transformation. So looking back a couple of slides, thinking about what is it that I'm really good at, that's the key bit to understand when you're trying to embark upon an interim career, because it needs to marry up with what most businesses need an interim for. And in my view, it's mainly change and transformation. Yeah.
Yeah. And generally people that have been through this journey before, either in the corporate world or you know, in a series of interim assignments. But making that transition from the corporate world, if that's what people on this call are, then you need to figure out what your unique selling proposition is. What is it that you bring that company will not have or potentially won't have heard before? Okay, thanks for that, Claire. So what's a career in interim management? Well, so that's interesting. A career in interim management takes more than just a track record of delivery at exec level. You need to overlay your own professional experience with a set of important attributes which aren't necessarily unique to a role as an interim manager, but are essential if you want to build a successful career from the role. And the gig economy, flexible working, economic uncertainty, new organizational models, the relentless march of technology have increased both the supply and the demand for a more flexible executive intervention. And as you said there, Claire, building on that point, a state of transformation is almost becoming the new normal. You know, change is the constant. And that goes both for the clients that we work for, but also in our own lives. I mean, my brother, who is really was only 13 years older than me, had a 28-year career in IBM. He only ever had 2 jobs. One was with the post office, who sponsored him through university, and the second was IBM for 28 years. Now, in the same amount of time, I've probably done more than 30 assignments. So just within kind of half a generation, you know, the new normal is completely different from what the old one was. And that change, I mean, the thing that COVID has done, I guess, is kind of accelerated another dimension to flexible working. I mean, my current assignment is running businesses in Sweden and Finland, and I'm doing that, you know, from an office in Sussex, because obviously I couldn't travel. So here's an interesting one. So what are the essential attributes? So clearly number 6, and this is probably the one that Simon's going to touch on, the ability to win business. You know, you have to be able to win assignments, walk into that client and convince that client that you are the man or woman for that role. You're outcomes focused. So it's not about making the job last or climbing up the corporate ladder or you know, the normal things, the trappings, attractive as they might be, of corporate life. This is about getting in, getting out, and doing the job for the client as efficiently as you possibly can, which requires flexibility and adaptability. Because often, you know, in assignments, I generally think there's 3 stages of an assignment. Number 1, define the real issue, because 9 times out of 10, the issue that's presented is not the real issue when you get into the business. Secondly, is the kind of, okay, so you know, what's the how high is up? What's the actual what's the solution? And then thirdly is the implementation. And being able to be flexible and adaptable and think strategically, not based and let, you know, do that on the basis of being able to pick up on signals and information rather than going in with any dogma. You know, this is how we did it at XYZ company is generally not the way forward for interim assignments. Definitely effective communication skills. I mean, that's key. Those soft skills we talked about, the ability to persuade rather than tell, and this inbuilt kind of you know, innate sense that continuous improvement and change are the key skills that we're bringing here, and the attributes I think that as a community we probably have in common. Again, won't read this, but and by the way, these slides are available for you to download, and the webinar will be recorded and available on the IIM website. So don't worry if I'm going too fast. This is all available material for you. But again, in personal strengths, I mean, I focus in on number 10, have the stamina to keep going. I mean, sometimes, you know, that traditional Monday to Friday, you know, you leave on a Sunday night, you get to the assignment on a Monday, you travel back on, you know, Thursday night or Friday. That's changed a little bit with the kind of the Teams and Zoom environment. But just, you know, what I've found, I mean, in some of my assignments, spending a whole day traveling, I mean, this is exhausting work. And then the fact that, you know, you always have to be sparkling, you know, there's no such thing as having a bad day if you're the hired gun. Keeping that independent perspective is key. The fact that you're there to, in sometimes difficult situations, to be able to talk truth to power, and not be personally worried about the consequences of that. Having that independent perspective is key. The analytical ability, developing solutions, that perception thing I talked about earlier, being able to pick up on the signals. What are people really saying behind the words? Getting fast results, hitting the ground running, establishing rapport. Again, back to the interpersonal skills. And being absolutely crystal clear about what you're good at, what your functional disciplines are, you know, what your talents and skills are, your past experience, your track record. I suppose, and more often than not, that ability to work independently. You know, you're not there to make friends, although you clearly will. You'll often be in situations where you'll be seen as the outsider, and people will be kind of skeptical or cynical. So being able to get on with that situation is really, you know, examining your personal strengths and saying, is this a career you want to get into? I think, you know, this is a pretty good checklist. And of course, you know, it's not all working for 6 months and making lots of money and sitting on the beach for 6 months. In fact, I mean, I don't think it's ever like that for anyone. At least I'm yet to meet one who is. There will be downsides coping with this level of uncertainty. I mean, we all have imposter syndrome of, is anybody going to want me? You know, is my current assignment going to be my last? What do I do in periods of downtime? Have I got enough cash to manage through that? Loneliness versus solitude. You know, you'll be on your own for quite a lot of time, whether that's in your home office or, you know, stuck in a client in a hot desk in a client's office. You know, working independently, making and taking the tough decisions. But of course, on the other side, if you thrive on novelty, meeting new people, new situations, challenges, locations, you know, you'll thrive. If you've got that ability to be flexible, if you like variety, and you know, it is rewarding. You know, pays well or can do, and some of the work is absolutely fascinating. Personally, you know, I wouldn't have traded some of the experiences that I've had for the world. Okay, I'm going to hand over now to Simon. So, Simon, if you want to come in and introduce yourself, and I'll put the next slide up for you.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Hopefully, the discussion so far from Bruce and the input from Claire hasn't put anybody off from considering life as an interim professional. Because the upside is clearly quite significant for those who aspire to enter the interim profession and indeed to be successful as an interim professional. In terms of who I am, very briefly, you can see it on the slide in front. I'm a director and co-founder of Morphosis Partners. We focus on two things. The primary thing in the context of this discussion is supporting individuals. And what we mean by that is I suppose we're likened to being the business development arm, I suppose, for individuals who are looking to take greater control and ownership of their business development activities, with the output really relying on the acquisition of business, whether it be securing a permanent role or in the context of the IIM winning interim assignments. Morphosis Partners and the IIM have been associated for a number of years, and you'll see at the bottom there that there is a link for those who are curious to a seminar series that Morphosis Partners run in parallel, or in partnership, should I say, with the IIM. So can we move on then, Bruce? So when we're thinking about winning business, because the success of an interim really is ultimately going to be defined by your ability to win business, I would say that there are three undeniable success factors. So the first one is that technical subject matter expertise has to be the central play of your proposition. And as important as that is the value of your network. And as I sort of go through the assumptions here around how to win business, the element of network probably becomes just as important. Whereas in a permanent career, by contrast, you've got the colleagues around you and they will often bear witness to your contribution and therefore become the sponsor advocates. Whereas, of course, with an interim career, you're going in, you're delivering on an assignment. So the opportunity to really win over that broader network isn't there. And that then moves on to my second point, which is some people enter the interim professional thinking, I could do this to learn new things. Yes, absolutely. You can evolve your skill set. But I don't know many ISPs who will choose an interim shortlist based on people's weakest foot forwards. So you've got to really understand what your best foot forward is. That's where you're able to command optimum value. And that's ultimately where the market will look to choose you. And I suppose the third observation, really, to pick up on Bruce's example of his career versus, I think he referenced his brother. You know, as an interim professional, you're going to be looking for opportunities and assignments much more often than you ever did as a permanent employee. So there's a requirement here, which is to be able to actually source and to win the assignments. And I know a number of people in permanent careers who have arguably never had to look for a job. They've had their bosses and their peers move on. They've had the tap on the shoulder. But as an interim professional, you've got to be prepared to go out and look for business. Can we move to the next slide then, please, Bruce? So in terms of what that cycle is, it's fairly logical and fairly obvious, and you'll see the events as you go around the wheel, starting at the top, which is you've got an expertise that you believe has a value to market. You've ultimately got to align that to the marketplace, which means being able to identify the right individuals and indeed business situations where those skills are applicable. And that really picks up on Claire's point, which is, you know, if 80% of businesses are really centered on interim needs around change and transformation, to what extent are you able to translate your technical expertise into how that fits into a business situation? You know, so you don't go to market, for example, with a label, I'm an interim CFO, although many do, let's say, but it goes beyond that. It's about what are your specialties, what are your real differentiators, and how do those distinctions, A, elevate you in terms of the profile or value of your experience, but secondly, how do they align to a particular audience? So, for example, a recent client I was supporting as an interim CFO, we really focused on the fact that his expertise went beyond that of an interim CFO. It was actually about the fact that he had helped businesses deliver IPOs. So for him, the message we actually took to market for him as part of him being able to win business was focused more so on the ability to take businesses successfully through to IPO. So you've got to be able to have a method that helps you align that. And then once you've understood what that niche is, it's about where does that message sit? And again, not wanting to repeat Bruce, but it is CV. How does that sit in terms of LinkedIn? And ultimately the network that you have. And so the cycle continues, but the primary observation I'd like you to think about here in this cycle is that delivery on assignment is only one of those circles. So sustainability as an interim professional requires a much broader skill set than simply being, you know, a good marketeer, et cetera, or CFO. Okay, next slide, please, Bruce. So the channels or the routes that you have to win opportunities, to win assignments, are going to be critical if you're going to enter the interim professional with the strongest start to that career path and also to sustain it. And as you will see across there, there are a few different channels which kind of touch upon things that Claire has said and what Bruce has said. And the first one, of course, are the ISPs. They are not there to be ignored. They are there because they have, you know, a whole workforce dedicated to engaging with companies around change, transformation situations. And of course, they then become a conduit to interim professionals who have the skill sets to be applied. But they're not the only route. And according to this year's IIM survey, I think they accounted for around, if I'm correct, Tony, around 50% of the sort of assignment wins. But there are other things to consider. The first one, and the most valuable one, really is going to be your existing network, the people that you have worked with, rubbed shoulders with, colleagues, former and present. But the key requirement here is don't assume that they know what you are now looking for, because I can guarantee if you're looking to enter the interim profession, they will have you in a box which will have them see you as the permanent person that you were before. So you've got to be mindful of taking that new requirement, your new vision essentially, to those correct individuals. And really working with them to see how that then translates to businesses or individuals that may well be interested in your skill set. Certainly for the people that I work with and the work the Morphosis Partners done, we really focus on the next two pieces, which is direct competitor markets. Why is that useful? Because when you've got a client in distress or is feeling opportunistic you know, because change can be a positive thing for certain businesses, and other businesses will view it rather like a bunch of rabbits in headlights. So either way, there is a requirement there to think, well, hiring is based on comfort. So they're not going to take somebody on who would like to have a go at that assignment. They really need to look at that interim confidently and go, my baton, my problem, my opportunity is safest left with you. And so it's absolutely key that you consider your competitor marketplace. And you'll see this in advertised roles as well. You know, an ISP may say must have healthcare experience, must have retail, must have this. So if that's the noise that the market is highlighting, focus on that. Don't sort of sit there and think, my skills are transferable, therefore I'm going to put a punt in. The reality is you're far better off focusing your energies towards the businesses that are more obviously to recognise the experience and the value that you have. And that then moves you neatly to the next idea, which is identifying businesses that are compatible to the experience you have around a business situation or cycle. You know, change has both an upside, but it also has a turnaround side to it. And so from that perspective, understand where within a business cycle you are most adept and most able to deliver. And then it becomes quite easy between those two areas to identify businesses that are both in the right sector for you, but also in the right situation. I mean, for example, I get Google alerts every day that are constantly telling me businesses and boardroom situations that I just think, that's a situation, that's positive upside, or that's turnaround. And so one of the things that makes those two areas obtainable or realistic for you comes down to network and the quality of the network that you have. ISPs are absolutely an element of that network that you need, but so too are advisors, consultants within those segments. And it's probably no surprise that a lot of the most successful interim professionals, certainly from my experience, are fairly well connected to the accountancy firms, the advisory firms, the private equity communities, and similar. So think about that wider ecosystem that ultimately has access through the conversations they have and the networks they maintain to the kinds of opportunities that would be relevant to you. And the final element on that diagram that's worth noting is that, you know, often you can find within bigger multinational or complicated businesses that an assignment in one part of the business could, with the right internal networking, lead to continuity in other areas. Okay, next slide. And I suppose in short sense, why is winning business important? Because the decision to adopt an interim career and the lifestyle of being interim is a pretty important one, and it just doesn't impact on you. You know, in most cases, it will impact on your nearest and dearest and those around you. So it's worth focusing on. And so, as Bruce has pointed out, there are absolute highs to life as an interim, but equally the downside, if you don't get it right, is that it can be quite tortuous, really. And, you know, and a lot of interims are quite nomadic. So surround yourself with the right networks and teams, because if you get it right, life of an interim, as I'm sure Bruce and Tony will bestow, can be, you know, by proportion, full of far more positives in terms of outcomes and the upsides than it will of the contrary. So that's just a quick insight, because I'm conscious that for the attendees, we'd like to open up to Q&A, but hopefully that just sets the tone for some questions. So thank you.
Thanks, Simon. So Tony, I'm going to bring you in if you can come in. I'll address the mute thing. Can you? Are you there, Tony? No. Let me end the slideshow then, and we'll try and get Tony off mute if we can. I'm asking you to unmute, Tony.
Yeah,
so
I've unmuted now.
all right, there you go.
Thank you.
So, so Tony, there's just a holding slide here. I don't know if the team can see it, but just a bit of an advertising commercial for the IIM, what it does, and how it can support the interim coming into the profession and through their career, if you may.
Yep. Do you want me to just give a quick sort of 2-minute? Yeah, sure. Okay. So the Institute is, as I said, it's the only specific organisation in the UK dedicated to the needs of interim managers. The important thing from your point of view as a potential interim is that what we do in the for any application for membership is that we accredit the individual and what they're able to do. And if you accept the relevant level of membership to the Institute, you also take on a code of conduct, which you would find on the website that you will sign up to. So this, if you like, arms you in front of any end client to be able to point to the fact that you are who you say you are, and you have the technical competence to sit there and talk to them realistically about doing work for them. When it comes to people who are looking to join the Institute who already have a track record of interim assignments, then it validates that work. And also we're still saying to people that they undertake to follow, if you like, our governance code for a professional interim. The things that you'll see on the slide talk to the various things that we end up doing as an institute to try and do things on behalf of our members and for our members. I'm not going to spend a lot of time walking through this, but if you want to know a lot more, please contact either member services or indeed myself. And I guess the important thing, Bruce, is probably the next slide.
Oops. Which is that one, the contact details?
Yeah, that's him. Yeah. So I'm assuming that on this particular webinar, we've got people who are contemplating becoming interims. So the relevant membership level for somebody looking to transition into the profession is an associate member. The fees you can see in front of you. The contact points are there, so I'd just like people to feel free to be able to make that connection. The website link is there if you want to wade through it. If you have any problems following the joining instructions, then get hold of member services and they'll be more than happy to help you through. It should be all very straightforward. All you need to supply in the first instance, having registered on the site, is a copy of your up-to-date CV and a couple of referees that we can contact. So I think at this point, Bruce, that's all I probably want to say. I think we ought to be leaving time for people to ask the questions they'd like to ask, having had the quick canter from yourself and from Simon, and thank you to both of you for that.
Yeah, okay, so I see Phil's hand's gone up there. So look, can I ask attendees if you can type your questions into the Q&A tab? That would be handy. Assuming you can all see the Q&A tab, which I think you can. I'm going to stop sharing the screen now at this point. So we have Alan, Alberto, Andrea, Claire, Corinne, Dave, Denise, Karen, Marcus, Michael, Nicola, Peter, Renata, Sean, Tim, and Victoria. Do we have any questions? Perhaps whilst we're waiting on the questions coming in, assuming that tab is working, which I'm sure it is. Wait a minute, I see a question here from Nicola in the chat. Wonder if anyone can address the situation where an interim assignment is taken, then soon an overture is made to persuade to take perm when that's not what you're looking for. Could be awkward. Tips. Claire, you can come in on that one.
Only if you take her off mute, Bruce.
Right, if I'm going to take Claire off mute. So how do we do that? Claire,
I'm representing Frustrated of London.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah, there we are. I'm off mute now, so hopefully you can hear me.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi Nicola. So I think that's a really good question actually, and it does happen quite a bit. I think my response and tip would be it all starts with the beginning of the assignment and making sure that you've got those milestones and objectives of why you're actually there and what you're there to do. So earlier on in the presentation, I talked about 80% of our roles being change and transformation led, 20% being gap fill. If it is change and transformation led, it's really important to make sure that you have got those objectives and milestones agreed before you start. And then it's really clear you can signpost the client that you're here to deliver X, Y, and Z. And it becomes a bit easier to avoid that perm situation if that's not what you want. However, in a gap fill situation, sometimes that's a bit harder because you might be just filling a maternity leave for a CFO, for example, and you might be really good, and it's a little compliment to be, you know, persuaded to take a permanent role. But you've got to stay true to what it is you're looking to build, because if you're looking to build an interim career, you need that track record and you need those assignments behind you to help you win the next one. So I hope that gives you a bit of an overview about how to avoid that awkward conversation.
Thank you, Claire. I'm going to actually bring Nicola in. Nicola, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Would you like to ask a follow-up, or are you all good for that one? Are you new to interim, or have you been on assignment, Nicola?
I've been on assignment. I've been on some one or two quite hairy ones, regulatory wise, involving needing to make a formal report to a certain body, and that's clearly not helpful to an interim career or to any career. And the selling points are different than being able to identify when that's necessary. And I'm working in an industry, excuse me, which is under increasing pressure to deliver more for less in a very difficult political context. So I was looking for tips, really. And obviously interim is very expensive compared to, excuse me, permanent roles. And sometimes those within an organisation can have different perspectives on what they're looking for. So there may be a series of counsellors that want you to stay and start trying to engage that conversation, which is rather improper, actually, which is why I stepped back from the conversation. Yeah, so it's a quite complex world, really. Yeah. But it's interesting to listen to this. Thanks very much, and thanks to Claire.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know if you've considered joining the IIM, but certainly it's the network here to kind of share and because sometimes, and I've certainly felt this, it can be a very lonely world out there. I mean, there's times I thought I was the only person, you know, in the UK doing this, and then I find that, you know, there are hundreds of others of us. And there's a network there that sometimes you can lean on. And again, and this plays into the next question, which I'll take from Andrea, about the ISP community that Claire represents, and the annual survey that the IIM do, which kind of, again, is almost a directory of who the ISPs are in the UK. So if you want to know who the ISPs are, then a window into that is to go to the IIM, look at the survey, and the vast majority of them, certainly the well-known ones, are there. So on that, I will now bring in the question from Andrea. Great introduction, thanks, says Andrea. Thank you for that, Andrea. How would you decide which ISPs to work with when just getting started in the interim space? And what do you think is key in making the move from a permanent corporate career to an interim one? i.e. how would you convince someone to select you versus a more seasoned career interim? So a number of parts to that question. Firstly, then, how would you decide which ISPs to work with? Now, I have an answer to that, but I'm going to hand over again to Claire, who can give us the ISP lowdown on that particular question.
Yeah, sure. And I think it's a really good point to consider, because there are many interim service providers out there. And I think one of the tips that I would give is you need to be able to build a good, positive relationship with the consultants. And this is a long-term relationship. So some of the interims that I work with, I've known them for years. And, you know, we've built up a really great personal and professional relationship. So you've got to find somebody that you like, and you've got to find somebody that really understands you, understands your value proposition, and you feel comfortable that's going to be able to market you in the right way. So that's one way to choose. It's very much on the person that you build that relationship with. I think secondly, choosing an interim service provider is all about the sector and the value proposition that you work in. So many interim providers focus on industry sector. So for me, for example, I focus in higher education and the public sector. So if that's your background, you'd probably want to choose a partner that really understands that market and would have the most opportunities. But then also align yourself to an organisation that works in the proposition that you have. So change and transformation, for example. So that would be the other way to decide on which interim service provider to work with.
And if I can come in on the back of that with an unashamed plug for the Institute. So again, if you go onto our website, you will see that we're in the middle of a series of webinars which are kind of parallel to this, which are being run off the back of the annual survey, and they're on a variety of topics. The one tomorrow is actually on transformation. Like what is it? Is there such a thing as transformation? What does it mean? Who's doing it, etc. and so on. There's one on finance. There's one on HR. In the series, and two things there. One, it's in two parts. The first 45 minutes is a general session, a bit like this, where you'll hear representatives from 3 ISPs, different consultants on each webinar, talk about their own slant on the thing and answer questions. But then what we do is we go into, if you like, a VIP area, which is members only, where basically we come into the meeting format where we can see each other, we can hear each other, and you can interact with these ISPs. Now, if you were a member and you'd signed up for all those sessions, because these sessions are free to members, in fact, exclusive to members, you can't pay to get access to them other than by joining the Institute, you would have access to 18 of the top consultants from the top ISPs. Now, to me, that's gold dust. And if there was one reason for paying your 40 quid and applying for membership and joining the Institute, it would be that. But I'd very much echo what Claire said, and Tony, I'll bring you in on this one in a minute. I mean, I've spent 28 years basically trying to get to know people who I think have got a chance of getting me, who I can get them, we can work together. Some of them have moved from ISP to ISP. So it's as much about the individual as it is about the firm. And you'll get to know the people that are working with clients that you'd want access to. And the ISP community is important because whilst you're on assignment, it's very, very difficult to be looking for the next one. Because the first question you're going to get asked is, well, are you free? And then you're saying no, because you've got another 6 months to go. So this kind of being able to tee the next one up, and it's a bit like comedy, it's all in the timing. You're having to have these phone calls whilst you're on assignment to keep in touch with people who will welcome hearing from you and not view you as just a pain in the neck, which the good ISPs don't, and the ones that you have the personal relationships don't. But you'll get to know the ones that you jive with and the ones that maybe you just don't jive with. And of course, it's horses for courses. Tony, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. Going back to the sort of trying to tease out some of the initial comments we've got there. If you're looking to establish yourself as a practicing interim, it is likely that you're going to find the first assignment, or maybe a couple of three even, through your own network, because the ISPs have a candidate base, and they have a group of people that they know and love and are practicing interims. They have the luxury, if you like, of being able to present to any client where they have assignments, people who are well practiced and versed in the field. And not surprisingly, they're going to turn to those first. So unless you've got a rather bizarre and peculiar set of technical skills which are required by that consultant at that moment with that client, it's unlikely that's going to be your first place to get your first assignment. And that's, as Claire pointed out, the survey this year, I think it's about half of the assignments in the last 12 months were found by ISPs, not through personal network. So the other side of that coin is that interims have to have a good operational personal network that gets them to end clients, because particularly coming into the world of being an interim practitioner, you're going to have to use that, and part of the process would be really knowing how to work that network to help you find an assignment. So it's understanding how to make that network work for you. And I guess at this point the baton ought to be handed to Simon, because he's probably got something he could usefully add to that on the personal networking side.
Yeah.
Can I hand the baton on,
but
Simon?
Just before we bring Simon in on that, I'm going to pick up on the second part of Andrea's question.
Okay.
Which is she says, just getting started in the interim space, and what do you think is the key in making the move from a permanent corporate career to an interim one? So again, and Simon can build on this, for me there's two things. There's the pragmatic. Do you have an assignment secured? Because if you don't, do you have the financial runway potentially for 6 months up to a year in order to fund yourself and your family and your lifestyle whilst you hunt for that assignment? So that's the first one. And secondly is the emotional one, looking into your heart and saying, what is it that's actually driving you and getting you out of bed in the morning? And have you made that emotional jump? So I think and Simon can probably build on that, because he's probably got more experience than any of us of talking to individuals who are wrestling with those kind of dilemmas, if you like, or trying to spin those plates.
No, thank you. And it is a very interesting question. How do you essentially get started? And I think with ISPs, you can't blame them for, as Tony suggested there, that they would look to their network where there is, a relationship and a track record to go with it. So it doesn't mean that you can't secure your first interim assignment through an ISP. But in all reality, it is much more likely to occur through essentially sitting down, and this accounts for roughly 30% of the people that I work with, where I'll sit down with them and say, right, where have you been and what have you done? And it starts off very straightforward. What is it that you're looking to offer? What are you looking to take to a business? And what value do you think that presents? The second consideration is to then say, well, how does that currently present? If I was listening to that story, does that talk like a long, protracted, permanent role, Or have you been able to position that as a series of projects that, funnily enough, all are interconnected and loosely linked as a series of cogs? Because if you can start to articulate in a way that becomes much more precise and centered on language that aligns to the language of the interim situation, then that's certainly the key starting point. The second thing I would then say is that as much as people may fixate on interim, there's a little bit of grey area, which means that maybe the halfway house to becoming a full-fledged interim professional could be to actually transition to being a consultant or taking on a fixed-term contract, which some employers, you know, they won't class it clearly as an interim assignment. It won't necessarily be rewarded in the same way as an interim assignment, but at least it gets you into a situation where it's very much time-based, with, as Bruce put it, a start, a middle and an end. It's time-based, and therefore that then captures a story. That then becomes something that becomes more relevant, perhaps, in terms of its context to an ISP. So certainly work through your existing network to get them to help you. But the starting point for me is, how do you look at your permanent career and translate that into the series of projects and situations that that role sort of encountered and thrust upon you? And so it's those individual stories and case studies that you look to take. And when you do that, you tend to find that when you go back to your network with that kind of language, that you will find your route to an interim assignment not that hard, but it does require that time to think about how to reposition your backward facing career as a permanent exec into one that forward faces to support where you now wish to go. So hopefully that helps and gives some insight.
Bruce, you're on mute.
Thanks, Simon. Hopefully that dealt with the various parts of your question, Andrea. 6 or so minutes to go. We've got a question for Claire, or from Claire, for Claire. Yeah. So after choosing your ISP, or the ISP choosing you, best way to make initial contact? Well, you know, if all else fails, you can pick up the phone and cold call them. But Claire, what kind of mode of introduction do you prefer in terms of, you know, how you deal with approaches from potential interims?
It's a good question, because we get a lot, so you have to sometimes forgive us if that approach gets lost in the inbox. So I would recommend doing more than just popping an email. So most contact details are on our website, and the same with other service providers. So do try with an email, but I'd also suggest connecting on LinkedIn and just sending a wee message on LinkedIn to say, I'm really interested to talk to you about what you do in the sector. This is what I do. I think we can align to help each other. So I would say try and call me, link in with me, and email me. Those are the 3 ways. You won't be a pest, because we're always looking for, you know, new candidates to work with. So it is within our interest to make sure that we're communicating with new candidates as well, Claire. So but try and pick ones that are relevant to your sector and your value proposition. You'll get a better response that way as well.
Okay, so thanks, Claire. Hopefully, Claire, that answers your question. All right, so look, we've got 5 minutes to go. We're going to finish promptly on time. I think we've dealt with all the questions that, well, we've got one open one. Let me see what that is.
There was one that I answered, Bruce, and it disappeared. It was from Tim about, he's been in 2 interim roles with the same employer.
Yeah, I can see it now.
Yeah, but I can answer that now if we've got time, or I don't mind picking up.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So let me just read this out. So I've been in 2 interim roles with the same employer for 2.5 years. It's likely to be extended again for another 6 months. I enjoy the role, but I'm concerned that whilst this might be attractive to potential employers for a future permanent role, it isn't really helping me build my CV as an interim. Well, Tim, I can sympathise with that, because in 2001, I think it was, almost 20 years ago, I was contacted by an ISP and put in touch with a client at Barclays Bank PLC who told me that, well, the new CEO wants to do this project. There's probably a month's work. It's not going to go anywhere. But, you know, go in and have a look. So off I went. It was in March. By September, I was still there. And of course, we're coming up to the 20th anniversary of that event, the planes hitting the building. I remember standing in a Barclays office and watching it. But what actually happened was that I was extended a number of times. So I finished up in Barclays doing 7 assignments over 8 years. And when I popped up in 2009 again, very few of the ISPs I knew actually knew me. And it was classic, don't you know me? So I can feel your pain. But well done for having that assignment extended. You must be doing something well. And of course, you know, congratulations, because being in work is, the market must be buoyant if you're in work. So Claire, you come in and add your spin to this.
Yeah, I will, just quickly. So Tim, I think here it's all about positioning. So I think it shows that you're doing a great job, and whatever work you're involved in means that you're doing something from an ongoing point of view. But when you get to a point where you are then looking for your next interim assignment, it will be how you position those chunks of work on your CV. And how you write it and how you articulate what you've been doing in each of those sections of your time. So without knowing what type of work you're doing, probably can kind of stop there, but it is all about positioning. And I'd be happy to talk to you afterwards if you wanted some advice on more detail around how to do that on your CV. I'd be happy to do that.
Can I just add one thing, which is that trying to decide whether or not you've been there long enough or even too long. Part of that is to take a look at what's happening in terms of the type of work that you're being asked to do. If you're starting to take on a lot of corporate-y Z-grade tasks where you're getting loads of admin, that's a very good signal to say you've probably been there too long, because you're becoming part of the furniture. And if that's the case, then you're losing your edge as an interim. You're starting to be absorbed into the system. And you've got to think of yourself as the grit, the bit of sand that sits in an oyster to produce the pearl. No pearls without grit. But once you've become the pearl, you then need to move on to the next thing, because a pearl sat in the oyster is no use. It needs to be on a necklace or in a ring.
Oh, lovely analogy there, Tony. So look, on that note, I'm going to bring this webinar to a close. I'd like to thank the panelists, Simon, Claire, and of course, Tony, and everyone that participated. Please go onto the website. I'd encourage you to have a look around. This will be recorded. You'll get the recording. The presentation is there. We're all on LinkedIn, so please feel free to connect. And hopefully we'll see you at a webinar very soon, and all the best with your interim careers. Thank you all.